Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. I'm excited to be talking to author Fawzia Mai Tung, and she is going to be joining us and talking about her award-winning book, which is The Wonderful Tale of Donkey Skin, and also just in general how we can encourage reluctant readers. What's it like for her? Why is it important for her to be creating books from her perspective, her lived experience as a Chinese Muslim? Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So
Thank
good
you.
to see you again.
Good to see you.
Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for those that don't know you and tell us what was your journey to becoming an author? Was it something you always wanted to do?
Yes. So my name is Fawzia Mai Tung. Fawzia Mai originally, then I added Tong on my name when I got married. So I'm very old actually. I may not look like it because I'm Chinese, but I'm very old. So when we were young, we didn't have television and I just read books. I loved books. I always wanted to be an author. So my dad, I remember, used to speak about Françoise Sagan in a very odd voice, admiring this young French girl who became a published author of a hit bestseller at the age of 19. So I kept thinking, I have to beat her and I have to publish a bestseller before the age of 19. Unfortunately, here I am, more than a few decades later. So really what happens is very simple. My parents are Asian, obviously. And as you know, we have no other career for our children in mind, except for being a doctor or an engineer. So I ended up being a doctor, but also a journalist and an educator eventually. Now I'm finally retired and I decided it's time to do my dream job, which is a writer. And that's how it started after my retirement.
I love that. What a great story. And you, as far as children's books, you're probably best known for the award-winning book, The Wonderful Tale of Donkey Skin. Tell us about that and what inspired it.
All right. So when I wanted to start writing, I said, what shall I write? Oh, there are tons of things I want to write about, because this is the thing. If you start writing at the end of your life, there's a lot that happened in your life that you want to talk about. But the first thing popped in my head was children's books, because that's what first inspired me to become a writer. And also because I've been a teacher and an educator and, a lot of things in education. Well, if you want to know, also principal, school founder, education consultant, and so on and so forth. But so anyway, I've been involved with children's education for a long time. And that's the first thing that popped up in my head. I said, I've got to start with that. And when I started writing, the first thing that came to my head was, again, fairy tales, because I loved fairy tales since I was young, and I still love them, as you can tell. And I think many people in the bottom of their hearts still love fairy tales, though they may not say so because it sounds too childish, right?
Right.
So I started doing that, and immediately I found I couldn't write them. I could not write them because I've been a storyteller all my life. Since I was a kid, babysitting for the other kids in the embassy, later on kept babysitting my own children. When I was a youngster, I was a babysitter, so that's how I kept my little customers happy. So I've been a storyteller all my life, and all these kids started talking in my head. So I found that if you just write a book like this, children will not read it. I mean, that was my first reaction. They will not read it. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that, how that helped later on. But so this particular story, this book, is actually two stories in one. It's based on an actual fairy tale by Charles Perrault, a French fairy tale, which is very well known in France, but somehow is not known at all here in the US. So it's called Peau d'âne, meaning donkey skin. And so I started writing as a grandmother, which I am, talking or telling the story to a grandkid, which I do have. I just had 9 and awaiting my 10th right now.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. So I don't know if you've ever told stories to a group of children. They won't let you talk. You start talking and they interrupt you. So in my head, they kept interrupting me. So I said, I've got to write this down. They won't get out of my head. I have to write this down. So if you look at my book, actually, you'll find that it's actually a conversation. The grandmother telling the story, and in blue you have the listener, the kid, interrupting and asking questions. And it happens mostly at the beginning when they try to own the story. They want to understand the story and they keep asking. And today, by the way, children are way smarter than they were 50 years ago.
Right.
And they ask you very, very smart questions. Like you say, long, long ago, say, how long ago? In the faraway land, how far away? Which land? Which country? There was a king. Which king? They ask you these questions. So that's how the book starts. And I couldn't go on until I answered their questions. And so the strange thing that happens is that it ended up being this book, which is a fairy tale that I'm trying to tell, but I never get to tell the whole fairy tale the way it used to be. I keep changing it because the kids don't like it. They don't like the way it turns out, and they keep interrupting me and asking me to change it. So I change it, and eventually it turns. That's why I call it a wonderful tale, because now it is a wonderful tale. The original tale wasn't that great. Okay, I mean, I loved it as a kid, but I think that's one reason why it's not so popular here, because there are some elements that are not acceptable in this society. So it never did. And actually, many fairy tales, many medieval fairy tales, have elements that were not acceptable and still are not acceptable. And that's why Disney did a good job in changing many of those elements. So now they're, wow, wonderful tales, you know. Like the Little Mermaid didn't end like that at all, right? She dies.
Yeah, a lot of people are very surprised when they go back and read the original fairy tales and they're kind of changed.
So again, this is a fairy tale that I changed to make it wonderful, right?
Well, Sid, that's one thing that I think is so interesting about your book because of how you change the format. It strikes me that in a way it's like, you know, so many of the fairy tales were passed down from person to person. Mm-hmm. You know, they were originally oral stories that were passed down, and you've captured that in your book, which is really unusual. Like that you kind of captured that back and forth element that you know must have happened in the past when people were just telling these stories to their children, right? But it also means that the fairy tale can change, which is probably what's been happening over time anyway.
Right, right. So the collectors, what we call the famous, like the Grimm's brothers and Charles Perrault, they didn't actually invent those fairy tales. They collected them, right? Collected them and rewrote them their way. So now we are collecting them and rewriting our way. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's no copyright on whoever's version.
Right. Well, that was something I was going to ask, because I know, you know, with fairy tales, and I think you have some others that you're working on of stories from maybe when you were in Kazakhstan and other places, that some people think, I mean, it's like you have both arguments. Some people say fairy tales aren't relevant anymore. They're so old fashioned. We need something new. And other people get very angry when you change fairy tales. They think, no, we want the classic. So what would you say to those? Like, why are fairy tales still relevant and yet we shouldn't?
So one good thing about writing this particular book is that you know I'm changing it. And you know why I'm changing it, because I'm actually telling you, right? So the kid says, no, it's not okay to peep through keyholes. Oh, today's keyholes are so small, you can't peep anyway. But back in my days, the keyholes were big enough. You couldn't through them. So it's not okay to peep, isn't it, Grandma? And of course it's not okay. So you have to change your story at this point, because, well, you're teaching them it's not okay to peep. And then in the story, your protagonists are peeping, right? And that's how it moves the story onwards. No, it's not okay. So you have to change that. Actually, that part was one of my most, while I was writing, I was going, ha, ha, ha. I was really enjoying myself writing this part, because I could imagine the kids reading. I was the eye exploding and so many kids, no, please don't make it eye explode. Okay, let's not do that, you know. Anyway, so yes, so this is this series. The other series, so far I've got only one half written, and the other one still in the plans. The Kazakhstan one in the plans, and the Chinese one obviously from my background. So that one, the favorite stories, is not just fairy tales. So the first part are legends and fairy tales. A second section, so each book is in 4 sections. Second section is folk tales. So folk tales are a bit different because it starts off with a real story that actually happened historically, but it's not like a king or queen. It's just somebody, a normal person, but they have a very wonderful story. And over the centuries, obviously that changed. You know, we don't know how much of it is true. We can guess. And that one, as I wrote them, one particular one, for example, a very well-known story in China. As I wrote them, you know, with my scientific background, I cannot quite accept things like, so the earth moved and the grave opened and she fell into the grave and two butterflies came out, the two lovers. And somehow I cannot accept that ending. So I researched and researched, and that was so interesting. There was an earthquake there. So there was an earthquake. That's why the boat actually docked. And then she found his tomb and said, oh my God, he died all this time ago. And, and I didn't know. And then, with every earthquake, there are aftershocks.
Right.
So with the aftershock, then the tomb opens and she tumbles in there. And whether the butterflies fly out or not, it's up to everybody's interpretation. Okay. So the thing is, folk tales, when I tell them with that grain of salt. I said, I could tell them, this is what possibly happened. And I say, possibly. So people understand that this is my interpretation. Okay. I don't say that is exactly what happens. Okay. Then the next section, third section, are historical anecdotes. I mean, Chinese history is very long, and there are some beautiful stories that, okay, I try my best to be, my problem is I wanted to always to grow up and become a historian. So I had this problem that I keep checking all the historical facts, and I come up with 10,000 facts, but in a story, you can't put all of them. You have to reduce them to one or two, But I try my best to be historically correct. Yet there are some things that are unexplained, and then you have to try to say, nobody knows why she decided to marry the emperor after all, but it's possible that she was touched by his declarations of love, And so I do put that in. So that you can see it's my interpretation here. All right. So I don't sort of cover it up by saying, yeah, she was touched and she said marry him after all, The third section are actually famous classics, and then those classics are really long. Okay, so it's like one particular story from the classic, which I think are so wonderful that the world should know them. You don't have to become a scholar of Chinese literature to know these wonderful stories. Everyone should know this, so they're so beautiful, right? So that's how I take care of it. Because if you look at, it's very hard. Like Anderson is different. Anderson wrote a lot of his own fairy tales, though they are not fairies in there sometimes, like Little Girl with a Matchstick. I mean, it's just poor girl who dies, and that's all, Right. So they're not really fairy tales in such, it's just beautiful tales. So those I find that if you change them, you have to say you changed them, right? But Grimm's and Perrault were more collectors of fairy tales, and therefore if you change them, you are doing the same they did.
Right. Just your own version.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean as far as the Chinese classic tales. I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but my son is really interested in Chinese history, and he got, I don't remember the name of it. I recognize it. I was just looking to see if he had it in here. It was one that's apparently very famous, and it came in 2 volumes, and they're both about this big, because he wanted unabridged, and 2 volumes like that. I mean,
he's really, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Yes,
I knew it.
That's it.
Boys die for 2 things. One is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The other one is Water Margin. Okay, so they're all about warriors and heroes. And my dad used to be all about them. My husband too.
Right. Well, so like you were saying, there's in Chinese literature, there's so much to it. How did you go about selecting? Okay, this is the story I want to tell. How did you get like one piece with stories that are so long and so involved? Or like you were saying before, there's so many historical facts. How did you find, okay, this is what I'm going to include in this story?
Okay, so to me is because I'm the writer, so it's okay to use my judgment. Okay, so according to me, what strikes me the most, like in the fairy tales, the first fairy tale I thought of was this one, because this is the one that really struck my heart when I was a kid. I love those beautiful dresses. Of course, I embroidered them a lot. I added so much more to it. They just said they were beautiful dresses. That's all, right? That they were the sun, moon, and the sky or weather, whatever you want to call it, or time dress. Because in French, the word temps could mean weather and could mean time. So I called it sky. And to me, when I look at this very thick volume, there are tons of stories in there. but a few stories stand out. And some have been made in the movies already. One called Red Cliffs. That's one of what I hated was that how they changed, because like of course, though it's one story, it's related to many of the things that happen around it and before it, and they couldn't cover everything, but they wanted to make it more sellable or something, so they had to add romance and women in there, but that had nothing to do with women actually. That particular episode, and it's fine. What's wrong with the story without women being the protagonist? I know nowadays almost every story has to have a girl protagonist in there. Like look at the Disney princesses. Right. Now they're trying to play up the boys as well, so they get a bigger role in the story. But pretty much it's always the girl standing up for herself. But there's nothing wrong with the story without girls in there. And just as it's okay to have a story without boys in there, you know? Right. They don't all have to have a girl who's the heroine and who wins the day. It doesn't always have to be that. Okay, so in the Red Cliffs, it's nothing to do with girls actually, despite the movie. So I want to bring actually the original story. And in order to cover my bases, I would have a little paragraph, not too complicated because you don't want to start reading too much, maybe less than half a page, about what led to this. And you could even have, depending on which story, a little paragraph after the episode saying what was the ending of the book anyway, right? Well, you cannot call it an ending. You could say the end of the dynasty or the period or the era, because China is still alive today and the history is still ongoing. So yeah, when you talk about the country and history, there is no ending really, just the ending of that era, you know. Yeah.
And so I want to go back to what you were talking about the format. You talked about how sometimes you change the story, and a lot of it is kind of imagining this back and forth with kids. And I know you said that really helps reluctant readers with the story. Why is that so important for kids who maybe have trouble picking up a book?
Okay, so like I said, I've been in education for many years now, starting with when I got married and started having children. That's when I discovered I had a passion for education, despite being a psychiatrist at the time. So there is, I call them reluctant readers. I thought I coined the terms until I found out it's actually being used. But the reason I say reluctant is because they don't have a problem learning how to spell or how to put words together. They have no problem with phonics. They mastered the whole thing. You give them a book, they read every single word in it. But you give them a page, they read and say, what did this talk about? And no idea. We read again. I think it's about a donkey. Okay, read again. I think it's a, and you start thinking, are they dumb or something? Right? That's what you're thinking. Because so when I first came across such students, I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? And I discovered, this is like many years ago, and now I'm many years later. So basically, in reading, there are two processes. One is actually the deciphering, and the other one is what they call upper level thinking or metacognition, right? So metacognition is what we do. When we, as an adult, we read a piece of news and say, oh, come on, was the crowd size that big really at the rally? I wonder. You know, are the reporters telling the truth? So your mind is thinking something while your eyes are reading something, right? So, so children, when they start reading, because it just came through the whole process of learning how to read, they are still stuck on how to read. So when they are reading, for example, The Wonderful Tale of Donkey is part of a middle grade picture book series. So they say, wonderful, they're reading tail because I think is it tal or tail. Donkey, they say, is it donkey or donkey? Okay, so they're still thinking that while reading. So when they finished, what was it? I said, I don't know, because they were not thinking about the meaning, right?
Right,
so,
right.
So what should happen is, and actually the solution is very simple. It's already been implemented all over the, well, at least US. I don't know about the rest of the world. I have to check whether it's happening. But it has been proven that the most efficient or the most useful method of improving reading fluency is for an adult, usually the father, mother, or grandparent, or whoever, to sit with a child on a daily basis, read at least 20 minutes with them. Now, you can well imagine that child is not going to stay silent when your mom is reading to you. She's going to interrupt, she's going to ask, and the mom's going to explain. They will discuss the topic and so on. So that is exactly developing metacognition. And that's why children who have adults reading with them will improve. Now, the problem is, how about those children who don't have an adult reading with them daily?
Right.
And that's why they fall behind. Now, what my book is, I discovered this afterwards, after I wrote it, because I implemented on my students and so on and so forth, on the ADHD kids, which is a new discovery for me. And I was astounded, not only at how much they loved it, but how effective it was at focusing them. You know,
Right.
Wow, what's so great about this book? Because I found that I did exactly what they needed. Okay, so basically, the reluctant reader now, in my book, you see the grandmother is the part of the storyteller adult who reads with them, right? And the child interrupts right there in the book, and the adult explains, and the child says, but, and the adult explains, right. And when they need to stop the discussion, she stops the discussion, like discussion about birds and bees or butterflies and flowers or whatever. And he said, but, so the grandma figures out, we are getting to deep water, that is, I need to get, okay, that's it, let's move on. And this is exactly what happens in a real situation, right? And so this is why reluctant readers love this book, because now it becomes an adult sitting with them. You will find that most reluctant readers do not have an adult sitting with them reading books every evening. Right. Usually it's evening. It could be any time of the day, but I'm just saying evening, because that's when you snuggle up in bed and start reading a bedtime story. You know, that's how I figure it, you know. And that's why it is so, so let's see. Number one, it provides the adult reading partner. So it gives you the metacognition training. Number two, which is one thing I don't know why, the minute they move from picture book to chapter books, oops, all illustrations go out the window. Yes. Except for the cover.
I was noticing that because yours is a middle grade picture book series, which is, you usually don't see that.
Yes. Yeah. And by the way, I have my own beef about picture books, because there are two types of picture books now. One, which is the child opens, flips, and reads. And the other one, he has no idea, he cannot read, absolutely. I mean, no way a 6-year-old or 5-year-old can read that stuff. And some of it written beautiful poetry, by the way. And the adults love it. And the child says, okay, it must be good since my mom loves this. So that's what I'm saying. There are two types of picture books. And now, one for the child, one for the parent to read to the child, right? But once you graduate from picture books into chapter books, what they call, I'm now only read chapter books now. Why should I read your books? Because it is a chapter book, except that it still has pictures. Okay, so if you want to, it could become a chapter book, but that's not the idea, because many kids just don't want to read the chapter book. It's too boring. They don't pictures, right? And why? We are adults who go to art galleries to look at beautiful pictures, right? Why do we deny them the right to associate beautiful pictures with interesting stories? There's no reason why we should do that. So my point is, bring back the beautiful illustrations. And the other thing is, and that was my beef when I was a kid. So my favorite authors were Alexandre Dumas and Jules Verne, obviously French authors, because I was reading in French at the time. And the reason was it was action-packed. Right. Yeah, my sisters started reading more like Charles Dickens and others, and it took me longer to warm up to them, because it had so much more other words in there. In other words, that wasn't just action or dialogue, all right? Yeah. And but of course, by the time I was a good reader, I enjoyed them tremendously. So before you reach that stage, you need a lot of action. Okay, right. So that is the other thing. Fairy tales have a lot of action. So that's why fairy tales are very well. Plus, good old fairy tales always have what our soul needs psychologically. So, you know, there it is. So that's why I feel that these books are such a success with not just reluctant readers, but also ADHD readers. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, just what I've seen with my own children, even though, like you said, they're able to read, they're good readers, but they enjoy the picture books or like graphic novels. I think that's one reason they're so popular, is kids don't want to leave behind the pictures when they switch to older books. Yeah, and yet
no reason why they should, except that people want to save on the printing.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on time, and I want to be mindful of your time and respectful of that. So I just wanted to wrap up. Can you tell us, you mentioned a little bit about the other books you're working on, but can you give us an idea of what other your upcoming projects or your current projects?
Yes. So another series is my biography. So it's not just me. I think my life was interesting, but my students, my children, my grandchildren. I mean, the kids around me all say, Dr. Fawzia, you have to write these down. Please write them down. You know, so I wrote them down and I tried them on my students for reading. And again, they are great successes, I guess, because my life is also action-packed. But the problem is I found that there was too much of it. So I spent 3 years on the first, what I now call the first volume. And it becomes a book of itself. It's from my birth till when I'm around college age. Because I don't know if you know, but I went to 13 different schools in 5 different countries. So I had to learn 4 different languages. Because in Turkey, I went to a French school, you know, so, and so on and so forth. So, my life was such that every year I had to change a school, even if I was in the same country. Anyway, so long story short is a lot of things happened to me. And through this, you actually learn a lot of stuff. You learn about Chinese Muslims, you learn about children of internationally mobile workers. Plus you learn about the education system in every country. They are different, you know. So my second one, which I hope will be published this year, is called Mirror in the Sand. It's about my 11 years in Jordan. So by the time my father was again transferred to another country, I told him, you know what, Dad, I'm going to stay here because I'm in medical school now. I don't want to keep on changing because every time you change, you either go behind or in front and you have either to repeat or jump over. And it's the story of my life. I was lucky, I ended up 2 years early going to college, but some people I know was 3 years late going to college, you know, so you know, all of us, we go when we keep changing countries. So I said, that's it. I want to stay here and finish. I want to finish. So after my dad left, and my whole family left, I stayed on. And so it's from high school till I became a young psychiatrist. So that's, and of course, there's a lot of stories about Jordan, about crazy people. And my students love the crazy people. I'm sorry for calling them crazy people, but you know, when you are in a developing country, now things have, I hope, have improved a lot. But in my days, pretty much people would not bring mental health sufferers to a psychiatrist until they're raving mad.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So they were bringing them in chains in the back of a pickup truck. And, you know, this is what I used to have to deal with. Anyway, so then the other 2 in the works, which I don't know when those will be done, is the next one about my getting married and parenting, and another one about education and schooling. So anyway, so then other than that, I also have a book in the works about finding God in the garden. I'm a great gardener. I love gardening. I'm working on a permaculture, what they call forest garden, okay? And interestingly, gardening increased my love of God and my connection with God. So I'm writing about finding God in the garden. And then, of course, this book might be set back now that I may not be able to return to China, but a book about Chinese Muslims and Islam in China. And then, but you know, there are many books about Islam in China, but they all same old. They all talk about the same thing. So mine has different insights into it. Really, really interesting insights. I mean, we don't have time for that. I can't talk about it. And finally, I finally decided to write a novel. That's about a year ago. I started, or 6 months ago. I can't remember when. The idea came to me because I keep teaching certain novels to my students. And one of my favorite final projects is, if you were to write a sequel, what would it be about, right? So this is one of my favorite questions. And the Count of Monte Cristo, nobody ever gave me an interesting sequel. Never, nobody. I kept saying, why don't you think about it? Then finally I thought, you know what? I'll write the sequel.
Yes, yes, good.
So that's what it is. It's a sequel to the Count of Monte Cristo.
Well, I can't wait. You have so much going on. You're very busy, but I can't wait to see all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome.
And for anybody,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, anybody who's joining us late, this is going to be up in just a few minutes on Instagram, and then the whole interview will also be up on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much. This is so fun to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I don't know how to get out now.
Yeah, I'll close it out.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.